Hello and welcome to The Time of Telling. I'm Mark Walker, and this podcast is based on my unpublished manuscript, The Time of Telling, John Star Cook and the Word of One Tarot, as well as being based on the newly discovered unpublished manuscript, The Lion's Tale, John Star Cook, The Magical Tale of John Star Cook, I beg your pardon, by Rosalind Sharp Wall. Now today is the 21st of August 2026. It's exactly 50 years since John Cook died. We have observed this occasion over on the Royal Maze Facebook page, so you can have a look at that. There are a few choice anecdotes from the remarkable life of John Star Cook. Here we are continuing with the tale of Tororoot. You will recall that John Cook, with Mary Oser and Peter Oser and their friend Daniel, had left Geneva and gone to Africa on instructions from the Ouija board. The last thing that happened with Peter and Mary was that they both saw, or thought they saw, or hallucinated a crocodile in their room. Continuing the story. The following day, Peter bought a Land Rover and decided that he and Dan would drive it to Lobito, the next destination given by the Ouija board, while John and Mary would fly. They did not want to make the 2 or 3 day trip in the Land Rover, so leaving Peter and Dan to drive through the mud, John and Mary took off for Lobito by plane on December the 28th and had a lovely few days swimming and relaxing. On New Year's Eve, they decided to go out and celebrate. They asked at the hotel where they could go in Lobito and were directed to the country club. Everyone in Lobito will be there, the manager told them. Just before they left, Peter and Dan appeared, exhausted, in the Land Rover, and no, they did not want to go to the country club. They wanted to eat and rest. Mary had bought in New York one of the first short evening skirts, John related. For in those days, everyone wore long skirts, and she had a glittering Persian gold coat and wore all her jewels, which were mostly onyx, long onyx earrings and an onyx ring and a long onyx cigarette holder that had belonged to Peter's mother. She looked very, very elegant. John, too, was elegant, in a tuxedo with a black tie, not with a white tie, however. When they arrived at the club, a man who they assumed to be the head waiter appeared and invited them in. As there were no tables, he cleared one for them and had it set up in a special manner, in a special corner near the orchestra. When midnight approached, the supposed head waiter came up to the table and asked if Madame would dance the New Year's dance with him. They were somewhat startled, but suddenly remembered that before leaving the hotel, they had done the Ouija board, and it said, "You will enter the new year with the Tororoot." So Mary said, "Why not?" And she danced in the new year with a man who was, after all, not the head waiter, but the president of the country club and the most powerful man in Angola. His name was Manuel da Costa, and Manuel da Costa immediately fell in love with Mary. They learned later he had known Mata Hari, the great spy in World War One, and Mary was the first woman he had ever met who reminded him of her. Back at the hotel, John and Mary told Peter and Dan about the fantastic man they had met at the club, and they decided to again do the Ouija board. "He's the one you are looking for," they were told. But at the time they did not understand why, nor see a connection between Manuel da Costa and the mysterious Torerute. In the ensuing weeks, as they were not to proceed to Cosinga, their next destination, until early February, the four became very friendly with Manuel da Costa, who was now openly in pursuit of Mary, and Peter bought a truck from him. They would need both the Land Rover and the truck for the trip into the Diamond Country, which required safari equipment. One day, Manuel drove us down to Benguela, which was where the slave port was originally, John related. And on the way down, he said, "Do you want to see something funny?" And we said, "Sure." And we stopped at a strange round stone building and went up onto a platform. From inside the round building were crocodiles in a deep tank, which at that time of day, for the entertainment of the spectators, they were feeding. They were throwing huge pieces of meat at the crocodiles, and they would leap terribly high. They'd leap up and out of the water to catch these pieces of meat and fight among themselves over them. It was spectacular and horrible. Later on that day, we found that the name the Africans call Manuel da Costa was Torerute, and that Torerute meant crocodile. Except for Manuel da Costa and his passion for Mary, they could never have gotten into the diamond territory near Cosinga, for he owned half of the diamond mines in that part of Angola. Before leaving Lobito, Peter bought 2 big diamonds and an emerald, as he had been commanded to do by the Ouija board before they left Geneva. And he gave the diamonds to Mary and the emerald to John. Their significance in regard to Torerute and the tea tree and their mission in Africa to avert an atomic catastrophe was never understood, but they did play a definite part in the adventure in Angola. Manuel thought we were absolutely crazy to want to go to Cosinga at this time of year, and he couldn't understand why we wanted to go to Cosinga, John told, and we couldn't tell him. But he said, all right, he would arrange everything. Towards the middle of February, John and Dan started out for Cosinga in the Land Rover, while Mary and Peter, accompanied by the chauffeur mechanic Manuel had found for them, took the truck containing the safari equipment. This division of forces, again, was according to Ouija board instructions. So John and Dan were to go via the Quimania River, which only the Land Rover could manage. They slept by the edge of the river that night, and at 2 a.m, they were awakened by curious sounds. Scuttle, scuttle, squish, squish. Dan turned on the lights to discover a huge crocodile trying to get into the Land Rover. "Boy, did we get out of there fast," John remarked. What was this crocodile thing that was haunting them? They drove on to the hotel in the town where they were to meet Peter and Mary, but Peter and Mary had not yet arrived. They went to a bar next door for supper and a drink. I'll never forget there was this drunken Portuguese in the bar, John recounted, and since we didn't speak Portuguese and he didn't speak English, he began making pictures on the bar with spilt liquor. And one of the pictures he made was a crocodile, and he pointed to it and at us. Then he wiped it out. We didn't know what in the hell he meant. Just then, Peter and Mary arrived. When we got to the hotel, Mary said, "Do you know what we found on the road?" What they found on the road, pointing in their direction, was a huge crocodile made of mud, covered with pink feathers, and it had a man in his mouth, sticking out. It was as though it were a symbol of some cult, as though it were a symbol against us, because it was facing the car. The next morning they left for Kasinga, which meant driving 50 to 100 miles through dry riverbeds, as there weren't any roads. At Kasinga, they spent the night in a mosquito-infested hotel and were told they would find their beautiful tea tree the next day. "Where shall we go?" they asked the Ouija board. "Go as you feel. You will find it." It was the new moon of February of 1950, John recalled, and we kept driving along, and no tea plantation. I don't see any tea trees. I know what they look like. Tea bushes. None, 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 none. Finally, we stopped for lunch and consulted the Ouija board. "Where is our tea plantation?" It wrote, "You passed it. Turn around and go back." And I said, John said, "But we haven't passed any tea trees." But back we went in 2 cars, Mary and I in the front, and in the back was the African driver with Peter and Daniel in the truck. Suddenly, the Land Rover stalled and stopped. The chauffeur, who was also a mechanic, began working on it and could find nothing wrong with it, but it wouldn't go. We sat down and said, "Let's try the Ouija board." The Ouija board said succinctly, "Are you blind?" Mary looked up and said, "Oh my God, look at that." And there was a big tree right in front of us, and on that tree was carved a huge letter T. This was our tea plantation. A tea tree, not a TEA tree. They decided to camp about half a mile from the tea tree, and after setting up the tents, they again consulted the Ouija board, which told them, yes, this was the place that they had come to Angola to find. After supper, they suddenly heard strange sounds in the forest. They had a fire going, and Mary said, "It's a lion." Then the lion roared. She took a branch, which was like a fork, like a Y, and planted it in front of them so that it was like 2 eyes looking into the night. Then they realized that there was more than one lion, at least 2 lions, but maybe several, and they all began to roar. At this moment, the African chauffeur passed out by the fire. Dan got a gun out, but Mary said, "No, no guns. Remember? No guns." The Ouija board had explicitly forbidden them. So he put the gun down, but kept it by him just in case. What were they to do? For some reason, I said, "Let's sing," John related. So we began singing, and we sang everything from Yankee Doodle Dandy to Mae West songs, Marlene Dietrich, Ella Fitzgerald, and Christmas carols. While we were singing, the lions changed position and went around behind us. So we turned around and began singing in that direction. And Mary turned the forked branch around to protect us. Then the lions moved in another direction, and finally to the fourth direction, making the 4 compass directions around us. And so we kept on sitting there, foolishly singing, but not so foolishly, for it served the purpose. The lions never came near us, and suddenly they left. We thought it was all over, but then there came this hush that was so dynamite. It was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever experienced, said John. Of something coming at you. It was as though all of Africa was being pinpointed towards us. From all directions over our heads, Mary said, "What do you think is going to happen?" And suddenly, boom! It was like an atomic bomb going off over our heads. It was enormous. It was not a thunderclap. It was louder than any thunderclap I've ever heard. It sounded like being just under a bomb. And then suddenly the whole atmosphere changed and was like a rain of grace or peace, completely descending over us and surrounding us. It was one of the most beautiful religious type feelings I've ever experienced. At this moment, the African chauffeur woke up, yawned, looked around, not knowing that anything had happened. He had slept through the whole thing. And we will leave it at that for today. Thank you very much for watching. This is the time of telling.